Back at it here on the Two Deep NFL podcast. If you're catching us via the podcast, remember we stream live Tuesday nights, right around 9 o'clock Central is when we usually get at it. Jeff Chadiha, NFL Network, Eric Eager, Sumer Sports, Soren Petro from Sports Radio 810 WHB in Kansas City. We talked this week about the NFL draft. Is there too much love for Howie Roseman and the Philadelphia Eagles? Lots of first-round picks usually equal everybody loving your draft. That's the case this week. For the Eagles, did they get it right? What's with the Lions first round? I don't think anybody loves it. Do our two resident in-house Lion fans like them? Some Detroit Lion draft. We'll get to the bottom of that. Is Anthony Richardson a good fit with the Indianapolis Colts? Who do we love? Whose draft do we love? Whose draft do we hate? Lamar Jackson got paid, and they gave him a wide receiver. Is it all fixed in Baltimore? Are they ready to rock and roll and actually be a threat to the Kansas City Chiefs and the Cincinnati Bengals over on the AFC side? Did the Jets do enough to put around their new quarterback? We've been talking forever about Aaron Rodgers going to the Jets. He finally got to the Jets. Have they put enough around him? Well, we talk about it next here on the Two Deep NFL podcast.
You're listening to the Two Deep Podcast, the most complete analysis of the National Football League, breaking down the NFL like no one else can. Two Deep is hosted by Jeff Chadiha, Eric Eager, and Soren Petro. Jeff Chadiha is a senior columnist and on-air personality for the NFL Network and NFL.com. Eric Eager is the vice president of research and development for Sumer Sports. Soren Petro was the afternoon drive host of the program on Sports Radio 810 WHB in Kansas City. Two Deep is proudly brought to you by Gann Asphalt and Concrete, Kansas City's nationally recognized full-service paving and pavement maintenance contractor, making parking lot problems disappear since 1994. Free consultations, no commissions, in-house crews, and every project comes with a written warranty. Find them online at GannAsphalt.com or call 816-484-3338. Gann Asphalt and Concrete. One contractor, all things parking lot. Gann Asphalt and Concrete is now hiring for all positions: project manager, dump truck drivers, operators, and crew members. Starting pay up to $30 per hour based on experience, with paid time off and insurance, just to name a few of the benefits. Check out GannAsphalt.com for more info. Now, here are the hosts of the Two Deep Football Podcast, Jeff Chadiha, Eric Eager, and Soren Petro.
And good evening if you're joining us here on the stream. It is evening. If you are catching us later on the podcast, thank you for joining us. NFL Draft 2023, it is over. We have our results. We have all the new players. Now we're left with basically just the second tier of free agents. So for the most part, we're starting to get a feel for what these rosters are going to look like. And it's time to talk about who did the best, who did the worst. Jeff Chadiha from the NFL Network. How about it? The Philadelphia Eagles are being roundly celebrated, roundly and loudly. I put those together, new word. Celebrated for what they got done. Is this just a matter of having a bunch of high picks? You ought to get it done, or did the Philadelphia Eagles really have something that went beyond just the value of their draft picks and really did an amazing job, even with all the high picks they had?
Well, you have to know how to use the picks. It's not just having the high picks, it's putting yourself in position to be able to use them, right? They had that 10th pick, which became the 9th pick because of a lot of wheeling and dealing. I lose track of what it came from. I know it was A.J. Brown, it was a New Orleans pick, and there was a lot of stuff in between there. But ultimately, they traded out. They got that pick out of last year's draft and used it for this year's draft. And so instead of getting greedy and saying, hey, get all these picks, let's go ahead and draft these guys, they said, let's wait until next year. So he was available, and they were in position to go from 10 to 9 when Jalen Carter started falling. Now, could they have foreseen that Seahawks and the Lions and these other teams, the Raiders, would not have taken Jalen Carter? No, but they played it right, and then they sat there at 30, and then Nolan Smith came to them. So that was some good fortune there. But again, they put themselves in that position, and then also DeAndre Swift making that trade and adding him to a running back stable. You can sit here and say they're lucky, and you can sit here and say that, oh, they're getting way too much hype. But when this team lost to the Chiefs in the Super Bowl, when that game was over, everybody was talking about the impending demise of the Eagles because they had 16 or 17 guys who were free agents who are on the way out the door. And now Darius Slay is back, James Bradbury is back, Brandon Graham is back, Jason Kelsey is back. They've added Jalen Carter. They've added Nolan Smith. They've added DeAndre Swift. They've done a great job and also extended the quarterback with a flexible deal that allows them some maneuverability moving forward. So, yeah, I think Howie Roseman deserves a ton of credit for how he's managed his team because they were supposed to be going in the wrong way, and now they look even better than they did last year.
Eric, what do you think? Are they getting the right amount of hype, not enough hype, too much hype?
Well, I think people get annoyed with the Eagles and Howie Roseman because we talked about this on the last show, the Red, Gold, and Bold, the Best Youth podcast. The fact that he's not an evaluator and he's not doing anything like super brilliant when it comes to evaluating players. He's not, we don't get these think pieces about how the Rams are fitting the puzzle piece, and we don't get all this stuff about how the Lions use, GPS 40 and not the Combine 40 and stuff. All Howie Roseman is doing is he's sort of playing the draft really well. And, ultimately from there, he's picking up, the dollar bills off the ground that other teams are leaving there, right? So when, the Lions draft two guys that are supposed to be second rounders ahead of him, when, and all these players get shoved back, he's just picking the player that we all like, right? Not a player that they like especially, but players that we all like. And I think when you do that, you end up with drafts that look really good, but there's not his peers don't see a secret sauce that like that's being touted. They just see, oh, he's just doing the natural thing. Well, it's like, well, the natural thing looks great because all of you are stepping on your own junk the entire draft. And so that to me, I think is like why people get annoyed with Howie Roseman.
Yeah, I listen. I think there's something to be said for keep it simple, stupid, right? Like, and especially if Jalen Hurts is going to be fighting for MVPs like he did this year. If you've got that kind of quarterback, and we can talk about we've talked about his contract and about how many hits he gets exposed to, but he really developed as a passer. And if he continues to do that and he can just run when it's needed and he stays healthy, then all you have to do, and Eric, you got mad at me on some podcasts when we talked about Kansas City's building and whether or not to take a shot at somebody. We talked about tight ends and you're like, you don't have to do that. Just play the board. Tight ends are busts in the first round. Just play the board. That's kind of what he did here, right? He took the no-brainer picks, the picks that everybody said were going to be good. I do object to the idea that Nolan Smith was like the steal where he went, because it takes more than just winning a decathlon to be a great football player. And he had all those physical attributes, and he didn't set the world on fire. He didn't have a Derek Thomas or a Dwight Freeney like last year where he had 20 sacks like those two guys did in their last year in college. He's a tremendous athlete on a team where everybody around him's good, and all you have to do is win one-on-one battles, and he still ended up going at pick 30. So I think Eric makes a great point, Jeff, that the Eagles do seem to get it and not make too much of it. Like, we've talked on our Red, Gold, and Bold podcast about, Brett Veach just loving his board and valuing his board. The Eagles seem to value the overall real values. Like they seem to study the past and build their draft based upon that.
Well, and I've talked to Howie Roseman a few times about his philosophy on roster building, and he would tell you that as much as it'd be great to have Patrick Mahomes playing quarterback for him, and he loves Jalen Hurts, by the way, building a great roster is how you win championships. And so that's his mentality, is that, yeah, the quarterback does matter, but who you're putting around the quarterback matters even more. So that's what I like about what he does, which is he says, I'm not going to go in here and just say this guy's going to be better because he's playing with Jalen Hurts. Well, this guy's going to be better because Nick Sirianni's going to be coaching him. He's going in there and saying, I need this guy to be really good at this spot, and I'm going to find the guy who fits that mold the best. And so your point about Nolan Smith is correct. If he was the 10th pick in the draft, he may not have a chance to be as good of a player as if he's the 30th pick and he's playing with a couple guys he played with in college, and he's got Hassan Reddick and Sweat on the other side, Josh Sweat on the other side, and Brandon Graham in the locker room with him. So they're making that calculus. I think is even more important to a player succeeding, which is saying, what are we bringing him into? As opposed to just saying, well, God, this guy ran a 4.3 40 and he's 6'5" and 250 pounds. He's going to be great. I think they look at it like, how does he fit into our locker room, into our culture? and how can we make him better?
Eric, they did run into the cap this year, and they had to let some good football
Mm.
players go. Hargrave went to the 49ers, lost a corner. Are they better or worse right now?
I think they're a little worse. I think you have to factor in regression too with guys like Cox and Graham. Slay and Bradbury are older. Lane Johnson's older. They push a lot of stuff in the future. If you look at their over the cap page, the top 13 players I think on the roster all have paragraph 5s that are league minimum, which means it's all about bonuses, baby, and it's all about pushing that stacking it all together. Hurts is, and then they lost both coordinators. And I know people aren't enamored with Jonathan Gannon now in Arizona yet. We're going to talk about Steichen in a second, but yeah, they have to be considered worse, right? Like it's just regression plus losing some pieces. But I will say, like, when you look at their drafts, they're always sort of a year ahead of what they need, right? They're, Jordan Davis came in last year, and now Jalen Carter comes in this year, and Nolan Smith, and like Nolan Smith complements Josh Sweat, Derek Barnett, Hassan Reddick, and doesn't have to play right away, right? And that's a big deal. So they're doing a great job of building this team, but the atrophy is always going to be there for a team that wins as much as they did, especially as Jeff said, when they win by virtue of the roster, because when a team's more quarterback centric like Kansas City, regression is going to be about whether or not the quarterback regresses. When it's a team level thing, we talk about, there's 22 players. If you're more dependent on the collection of 22 players, there's more ways to win, but there's more ways to lose.
Usually when we bring up the Detroit Lions, there's a fight about who's the biggest Lions fan. And it's usually Eric just fighting against no one, because Jeff makes no real effort to claim his hometown team of the Detroit Lions. Yeah. And Eric likes to bang the gong quite loudly to make it clear that he is the biggest Lions fan. You love you some Dan Campbell. Do you love you what this draft is, and does it have Dan Campbell's fingerprints all over it?
Firstly, I want to congratulate Haley English, my former intern at PFF, who just joined the Lions this week. Probably the best addition they've made over the past 5 days. Be that as it may, man, the Jahmyr Gibbs pick, I mean, I guess people liked him more than we all thought, right? That was the thing coming in. You looked at the markets. One running back was an overwhelming favorite. Then 2 running backs was an overwhelming favorite. So we should have seen it coming. At 12, it looked really rough, especially they trade back from 6. They get to 12. Christian Gonzalez is still there. Will Levis is still there if they want him. Like all the proverbs about trading back and like, oh my God, you're still going to get some players. We're all sitting there for him. I even tweeted it out. And then they just, Brad Holmes goes and takes a running back. And then
he doubles down by taking the running back of the defensive side, a middle linebacker.
When Jackson Smith-Njigba was on the board twice. And I know Jamison Williams is there. He's suspended for gambling, and like he has not been reliable so far. Amon-Ra St. Brown's good. Marvin Jones is still there. But and this is the thing with premium positions. The market doesn't budge, right? Everybody sees like the betting markets don't budge. Every draft class on average is expected to have no impact on a team. On average, of course, we see the highs and lows. The Chiefs fans, we saw the high this year. This draft will help the Lions win this year because they need linebacker. The reason they're not in the playoffs this past year is because Seattle ran for like 250 yards on him in Ford Field, and then they went to Carolina and got absolutely steamed in the game that they should have won to go to the playoffs. So he helps. DeAndre Swift, not a very good back for the Lions. Like they had great blocking and like his vision was so terrible. So getting Gibbs in there helps. The problem is going to be in 3 years, we're coming up for air and we're like, gosh, Amon-Ra St. Brown costs an arm and a leg. Oh my gosh, Penei Sewell costs an arm and a leg. Aiden Hutchinson's coming up for a deal. It'd be nice to have some reinforcement for him. Corner, what the heck are we going to do at corner? And like you get to these like questions about premium positions and you're like, man, you had a draft 3 years ago where you took linebacker, running back because you wanted to win the division, and so that's where I get a little worried about this draft.
By the way, the Gibbs pick is a reminder to me to not overreact. I loved Gibbs at Alabama. I loved him at Tech. I think he's a really talented back, but I got burned, and I listen. Even I said I love the Clyde Edwards-Helaire player. I don't love where they picked him,
Mm-hmm.
but I was like, we'll see if it works out. And I was like, well, I love Gibbs, but I loved Edwards-Helaire. So I kind of forgot that nobody's going to think of him as a first-round pick. I really do like him a lot. I think he's a really good running back. He's not as big as Bijan Robinson, so I understand why he didn't go as high, but he's a really talented guy. But the Lions, your point's spot on, Eric. Like, you build a team that can win a championship. You're never all in. Like, you can't make your decisions based upon what we think we need right now. I love your point about they're trying to win the 23 championship only and not looking big picture on where things are, because they don't have a superstar quarterback. Now they get a Hooker later, but they don't have a superstar quarterback. And of their wide receivers, like, they act like none of those guys are going to go anywhere. And I think in 2024. Jameson Williams and Amon-Ra St. Brown are the only wideouts under contract. So grabbing another good wideout here makes sense after this year, to where you don't have to sit and you'll be like, okay, now we have to take a wideout. And the best one on the board was sitting there. They didn't do it. This to me smelled like, go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, I mean, think about this, like Chiefs fans, and that's a lot of our audience. But like when the Chiefs took Clyde Edwards-Helaire, what was the statement? It was like, the roster's full. This is a luxury pick, blah, 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 blah. All of those things were said about Edwards-Helaire. And again, good player, great play, like, good prospect. To your point, you liked him a lot.
Yeah.
And you roll the tape 12 months forward, and both tackles suffer Chiefs ending injuries that you could not have predicted, right? And instead, like, if that guy's a running back or a linebacker, you can go in free agency and sign a running back or a linebacker to start for you. That entire offseason, we were saying, well, what are the Chiefs going to do at left tackle? What are they going to do at left guard? Now, left guard's fine because you can go in free agency and access the top guy, and that's what they did with Joe Thuney. Left tackle, you have to go, because it's a premium position, you have to go out and use draft capital and a big contract. Now, with Brown, they held their water, but they still had to pay him franchise tag level numbers in addition to the draft pick they spend. So like the issue is, like, premium positions, that's where you have to spend your draft capital, because if you don't, you got to spend your draft capital and a ton of money later on.
Well, and people like the Clyde Edwards.
Whereas you can just go to free agency to get guys at linebacker, safety, running back, like guard, center, all those positions, and that's really the whole thing. Like, that's the whole dance.
And nationally, the Clyde Edwards-Helaire pick was celebrated. It was like, oh my God, here's another weapon for Andy Reid. And nobody was saying, Sammy Watkins isn't that good, and he's going to be out of contract in a year. And how much better would they looked had they taken T. Higgins, right? Which was the obvious pick that was sitting there next. And that's the point here with the Lions, Jeff. This does feel like a coach who's signing up for 4-year tours of duties with players because it's what he needs right now.
Yeah, but it's also, again, and Brad Holmes is a guy I like a lot, their general manager, who comes from that Rams school of thinking about how to build rosters. And so, you talk to the Rams, their belief is it doesn't matter how you get guys as long as you get the right 53 guys. And so, and when you're drafting, it's just names on paper until you actually see guys playing football. I'm not as upset about, and I understand the blowback Brad Holmes was getting for these picks and why these positions are not premium positions and all that. But in the previous podcast, I said the same thing I'll say now. I think when you get aggressive, I'd rather see you get aggressive for guys who are really good football players. And so if you watch Jack Campbell play and Jahmyr Gibbs play this year, you would say they're pretty good football players. Now, regardless of where they get drafted, 5 years from now, if they're good NFL football players, nobody's going to care. And I, for one, do think that the way the NFL was played this year, you're seeing running backs get a little more respect if they can offer a skill set that makes an offense more electric. I think Ben Johnson, their offensive coordinator, is a great offensive coordinator. And I look at what they have, the guys you mentioned. I think Sam Laporta adds to that. I think they had a better day two than day one, to be honest with you. Because I thought they got some players who could really help them immediately. And then Hendon Hooker being there. And so I'm thinking that their calculus is more that 2 years down the road, if Hendon Hooker develops, he's still on a rookie deal. We can make more moves to improve our roster. And these guys who are playing right now make us better more dynamic in the short term, it's a better play for us. So I'm not as upset about it, but I do get why people say, why in the world would you do that? Because, that's not what you do in today's NFL.
Yeah, I like your point about like the good football players. I also like that maybe the pendulum's gone too far anti-running backs. But man, I still think 13. You could have played that board. You could have traded back again, even if you're just taking. What was amazing is like fourth rounders are moving guys 3 spots up there in the first round. It was pretty clear that people are like, I'm fine with any one of like 10 guys because they were taking 33 cents on the dollar on some of the trade charts to move down like 3 spots because they're like, we don't really care about any of these guys. Like, and that's the thing is like, oh, well, the trade chart says we're not getting enough. So what? Like, I will commend anyone who's like, I don't care which one of these 5 guys I get, or I know no one's taking a running back. Just grab a fourth to move back from 12 or 13, wherever they were they at 13, 12. To move back to 15 or 16 or 17, he's still going to be there. So I'm with you on, at the end of the day, if you can't trade, although that area, there were trades going on with teams moving down, and you get a good football player, fine. At the end of the day, that's going to be what matters. But I still think you could have played the board better up there at that point. That's my point with the Detroit Lions. Gann Asphalt and Concrete, nationally recognized, free consultations, no commission, in-house crews. If you got parking lot problems, it's your business. You don't anymore. Not if you know Gann Asphalt and Concrete. Find them online at gannasphalt.com. One contractor, all things parking lots. Guys, let's move to the quarterback position. We knew what was happening with Bryce Young, Eric. We knew that's where they were going. At 2, CJ Stroud went. That didn't shock anybody, but there was a lot of talk that day that he could go somewhere else. Anthony Richardson at 4 with the Colts. It was the first time we started thinking, okay, where is this going to go? And we talked about one of the guys was going to slide. Eric, by the way, called it. He said, stone cold under on the 4.5 quarterbacks being drafted in the first round. You won that easy if you bet that because we didn't even get a 4th quarterback in that. So kudos.
Hendon Hooker, not even round 1, not even round 2, round 3. That is the biggest lock in the NFL draft that the quarterbacks fall.
Yeah, I don't know why they don't post it at just like 4 and say we'll take the push. Why they always throw that half in there seems to make it easy. Anyway, Anthony Richardson did make it 3 quarterbacks in the first 4 rounds. By the way, I'll note as well, as I had on Michael Lee, a guy from Kansas City, Missouri, who now writes for the Washington Post, who was relating the 99 draft to this draft, how big a deal it was that 3 quarterbacks went in the first 11, 3 African-American quarterbacks went in the first 11 picks. And that was a giant deal in 99. This year, 3 went in the first 4 picks, and it's yawn. I think that is a statement about the league. But Anthony Richardson's a guy that's got a lot of talent, but hasn't played a whole lot of quarterback at a high level. We've seen that with Trey Lance. We've seen that with Jordan Love. Those guys didn't start a lot. We haven't seen either one of those guys pay off yet. But Jordan Love, a lot of people are kind of liking in Green Bay. What do you think about Richardson for the Colts? A good roster. It's what we've been saying for 3 years. Is it still a good roster? Is he a good fit?
I don't know if it's as good of a roster anymore, but it's the kind of pick that Chris Ballard has to make to keep his job. And I think, to me, when I look at the AFC and I look at Pat, I look at Joe Burrow, I look at Josh Allen, I look at Aaron Rodgers now, Justin Herbert, Trevor Lawrence. You look at around this.
Deshaun Watson, Lamar
Deshaun
Jackson.
Watson. We forget about him. He's a Pro Bowler, right? Like, we forget about him. To win in the AFC, you cannot mess around with the Kirk Cousins type. And I feel like this is the kind of player. Now, I look at Shane Steichen. Shane Steichen's a guy I've liked statistically for a long time. When he was in San Diego or Los Angeles, he had Justin Herbert. Justin Herbert won Rookie of the Year. When he was in Philadelphia, he had Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts, before the 2021 season, I bet a limit-sized bet that the Eagles would have the worst record in the NFL, and they made the playoffs. Then they make the Super Bowl. I think Anthony Richardson has the potential to have the arm talent of Justin Herbert and the athletic ability of Jalen Hurts. If you put those two things together and they work, and you scheme an offensive line and you scheme receivers, they get Josh Downs, a great pick out of UNC. Obviously, Pittman's had a good career so far. The tight end with Jelani Woods had some emergence. Obviously, Jonathan Taylor's there. They got to figure out tackle. They got to figure out, defense is not great for them right now. I think that this is as good as Indianapolis could have done. I think, you look across the drafts, I think we talk about Philly, we talk about Pittsburgh. I think there's some really good drafts out there. Cleveland had a good one after you normalize the fact they didn't have a pick high. Indianapolis, to me, in 3 years, we're going to look back at this draft and say this is the game changer for the Colts.
Yeah. Jeff, you got a general manager that presumably there's some heat on in Chris Ballard. They haven't been able to get the quarterback right. Is this Mr. Right or just Mr. Right now?
Yeah.
Pick somebody right now. What is Richardson to the Colts to you?
Yeah, well, you're right. I think Chris Ballard was looking at Jeff Saturday as the head coach last December and saying, I got to do something that makes my owner feel good about life. And that means taking a guy that is more exciting than Will Levis. I will say this. I'm a big fan of the potential of Anthony Richardson. I mean, all this, all the numbers, all the skill set, and all that stuff. But when you're talking about a guy who's only started 13 games, that's got to give you pause. And you're right. The guys you just rattled off, number of guys who played well with that few amount of starts in the NFL who played that well early is very, very short. Mm-hmm. And people even talk about Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts started 40-some games in college football.
Yep.
Played a lot of football. Yeah. And so that means something. It means you know how to work. It means you know how to study. It means you know how to deal with adversity. And not to say that Anthony Richardson hasn't had his share of adversity, but there's been a lot more coming. Now, the upside here is that Shane Steichen is very flexible and has shown that he's willing to do different things to help his quarterback succeed. But yeah, they got to be really careful with him and how they handle him. And he's going to have to deal with a lot of stuff that, we talk about Trey Lance. He had a couple of years on the bench in San Francisco. We never saw more than a couple games, and that didn't look good. And Jordan Love, the same thing. I think Anthony Richardson, if he had that time, a couple of years to sit, would be great. But he's going to be playing early, and it's going to be rough.
Yeah, do you think, though, I think for me, the reason I like it for the Colts, though, is like if you bring Stroud into the mix, let's say, and Stroud produces kind of the average outcome for Stroud, that's pretty good, but it's not getting you anywhere in that AFC, right? Yeah. And the Colts are kind of been there, done that. 11-5, 7 seed, lose 9-8, get bounced, 7-10, that kind of thing. I know it sucks, and there's a book actually it's actually on my shelf here. I'm gonna pull it out for the
easy there, Aaron Rodgers. Stop trying
to. Is it Eric's book?
It's called How to Gamble If You Must, and the entire book is about when you have one chip, one chair, one chance, what kind of things you have to do. And unfortunately for Ballard, you got $100 left in your account and you need, and you owe 10 grand, right? That's exactly what, so you're not getting there betting a bunch of -110s with CJ Stroud. You're trying to get a 10-1 bet on Richardson and then moving forward.
Yeah. You hope you get the best of Cam Newton with the best of, take your pick of a big physical guy that can slam Ben Roethlisberger. You're getting some combination of running.
Lawrence.
Yeah.
Got your own division.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's what you're hoping for. You're shooting for. But I do think one of the things is they're offensive coordinators should be better now at coordinating an offense for the skill set of the player. Right? Like before in the old days, you plug the guy in, you try to make him what it is you do. NFL, we've seen enough offensive coordinators to say, okay, they will run him a lot. Right, they'll make the threat of the run, and they've got Jonathan Taylor, so it's option football, threat there, and then a play action, and then throw to hopefully somebody who's high school wide open because the threat of the run has done that. So I do think that there is a path to success with this pick with the Indianapolis Colts. What are the drafts we love? What are the drafts we hate? Jeff, you got a draft you look at and you go, love this one, hate this one.
I like what Seattle did. I think they jump out at me. I was surprised they didn't take Christian Gonzalez at 5, given that he plays in the same part of the country that their team is based in. But the guy they got is a pretty good player. Devin Witherspoon is an exceptional corner. And I think what you're seeing Pete Carroll doing is trying to rebuild that secondary that he had back in the Legion of Boom days when you had a defensive rookie of the year candidate last year, and now you've got this kid coming in this year. You're pretty strong at corner. You're bringing Julian Love to play safety for you. I think that's a pretty good start. And then you get Jackson Smith and Jigba at receiver. I like Zach Charbonnet coming in as a second running back to Kenneth Walker. I thought that the only thing I think about that surprised me is that they didn't do more with their defensive line, given that was a weak spot for them. But they made some moves in free agency. But to me, they got some really good players. The Bengals had a great draft too, in my mind. Really good draft.
Eric, you got anyone you don't like, Jeff?
San Francisco. I mean, and a lot of it's because they're dealing with the sunk cost of Trey Lance a couple of years ago. That cost them a first-round pick in this draft. They obviously traded some picks to get Christian McCaffrey. They're a great team. They don't need a whole bunch of help right now, but they didn't have picks. They drafted a kicker with the second pick they had to draft. It wasn't a great look for them this past weekend.
Okay. Eric, who are you looking at? Who'd you like?
Yeah, it's annoying how good the Bengals are getting at team building, right? Like they just do. I mean, you think about, again, we talked about this earlier, but like they have Osai, they have Hendrickson, they have Hubbard, and then they just go and they're like, look, we're going to get another defensive end once these guys transition out. He's coming in, right? And like weirdly, they used to do that also. Like they used to do that back when they were good before, right? Like they took Drake Kirkpatrick and didn't play him for a few years. They took, and they're getting back to that. Like when they're good, and then they just take premium players off the consensus board, and like it kind of annoys me how good the Bengals are getting at this thing, right? Team I didn't like, Houston. I mean, Houston gave up. And the hand, like I get the whole, okay, the owner wanted you to take a quarterback. You had Will Anderson as your best player on the board, but you gave up 137 million in assets to move up from 12 to 3, and you did it with you let a rookie GM take you to the cleaners, which is kind of a rough and the whole we actually paid that much to go up and get Stroud, but it's like, no, you didn't. Because once you take Stroud, that pick becomes less valuable, right? Because there's one less quarterback that everybody wants. And and then the other part of it is, if you like Will Anderson more than you like CJ Stroud, then he's not worth that much in a trade up, because any quarterback that you have rated highly enough to make that trade, you should not be rated lower than a defensive end. So I look at that, and then they trade up more and more and more throughout the draft. I know they got some guys I thought were, decent players. Like and Stroud and Will and Anderson will be good. And like you look at the Houston, they need players to put on billboards and stuff. I get that. I get all of that. But man, they got taken in this draft.
They need a ton of players. You stole my thunder, because Houston was where I was going on what is the rancid stench. I also wasn't in love with what the Bears did. Either when you consider where they were and what they ended up doing. It has such a defensive coach fingerprint all over what they're doing. But the Texans do not understand the draft. They literally just wanted to be invited to this year's prom, and they didn't care how much blow or how unshowered the person who took them to the prom was, how much blow they were doing, how much they stunk. It did not, how crappy their car was, how they had no future. They didn't care. Whatever it took to go to the prom, they were going to gussy themselves up, and they were going to the prom this year. Never mind that their life is going to be a train wreck on down the road, right? Because they're making poor decisions. You're getting CJ Stroud is going to be what this year, right? Even if you think he's going to be really good, do you think he's going to have a Ben Roethlisberger rookie year? How many quarterbacks in their rookie year? Joe Flacco, Ben Roethlisberger. Who else as a rookie took a team to the playoffs?
Russell Wilson.
And Russell Wilson. Do you think he's going to?
Kenny Pickett got them to 9-8 this year on the grace of God.
Yeah. But Soren, don't you think that if you're Houston, you're sitting there watching the Jacksonville Jaguars, who picked number 1 2 years in a row, go win your division, that they just go racing by you? Don't you feel like we got to get in the game here? We got to do something and be aggressive.
Yes, I do. I do. And then you got to go, okay, and now I'm sitting at the adult table. And so let's think like adults. Like somebody blows by me in a Ferrari. I go, wow, it'd be great to have a Ferrari. And I could sell my house, and I could probably, start making some payments on a Ferrari. But I'd be the dumbest of dumbasses on my block if I did that. I need to stick with my basic transportation. I'll pay off the mortgage, send my kids to college, right? Like Trevor Lawrence was in his second year. He wasn't in his first year. He was in his second year. And the Jaguars blew your doors off because they didn't even though they didn't make that great a pick with their number one pick the next year, but they didn't just blow their wad on doing everything to get in there. The first year they had Trevor Lawrence. They took their lumps, they took their first round pick again, and they made it happen. And when you give up, like my point about CJ Stroud is once you take him, the only way this works is if you feel, to Eric's point, the defensive end doesn't make that big a difference in your team. So the only way this works, the only guy that can elevate you like 8 games in a year and put you in range of 9-8 and being in the playoffs is the quarterback. So the only way this works is if CJ Stroud is so good that he lifts you to a point that there's no way you don't get above 500, right? Worst case scenario is 8 and 9. And then if you don't think that, then you would never make this move. You'd have looked to trade down, get picks into next year's draft, which most people think are better players. Embrace the suck is something that I have said for a long time. When you suck, embrace it. There are no expectations. No one thinks you don't have to, like, once you win 9 games, the Jags have expectations. If they don't deliver the goods this year, people are pissed. If the Texans go out and win 7 games, you can raise the tickets and go, we're on the come. Here we come. Right? Like, and then you got more picks and another big party next year.
I don't know. 11 picks next year?
No, I'm saying if they did, I don't know if whatever they have,
11 picks next year. Yeah.
You can keep pushing
it
back.
They had that many. They had the most draft capital next year going into the draft, and now Arizona does.
Yeah.
They gave it all to Arizona.
Yeah. So I mean, I just that to me, I don't like what they did. I think it's brutal, and I agree with you, Jeff. The Seattle Seahawks. I mean, the idea that Pete Carroll is asleep at the wheel. No, Pete Carroll knows what he's doing. I like Charbonneau. Again, this is kind of a Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I like Charbonneau, the player. I still think he's a back that you probably could have got a little bit later, but overall, getting the best wideout and the best corner, and the fact that they didn't take the local kid means they were convicted on Witherspoon, and they took him. This is why the Seahawks.
They also completely screwed up what Detroit was trying to do, because I think Detroit was trying to take Witherspoon at 6, and Detroit kind of lost their marbles after that pick happened.
Yeah. By the way, here's all you need to know about Tommy Moe. Get the Ferrari. You can sleep in the car. You can't drive your house. Good point. Thank you for that. By the way, we're brought to you by Gann Asphalt and Concrete. They're hiring right now, all positions, including dump truck driver, project managers, everything. Crew members, starting pay up to $30 per hour, paid time off, insurance, just to name a few of the benefits. Go to GannAsphalt.com for more info. Lamar Jackson got paid, Jeff. They got him Zay Flowers. One big happy family. It all fits, and they should be, one of the co-favorites in the AFC, or now better get it done this year because you got a super expensive guy right around the corner.
I wouldn't. Well, one big happy family in the sense that he's back in the locker room. Lamar signed, but I mean, Eric just rattled off all the challenges in the AFC, and it's God. I sit there and I think, they've got a new coordinator. Yeah, they're trying to make the quarterback happy with these new receivers. It speaks to their commitment to him that they passed on corner, which I thought was a bigger need for them, in this draft. I mean, they only have, Marlon Humphrey right now. They're only proven corner on the roster. But, I think that they'll be good. But the question is, can they outfight the Dolphins, the Broncos, the Browns for that last wild card spot? To me, that's where they sit. I sit here and I look at the AFC. Aaron Rodgers with the Jets. I think Buffalo's still going to be good. The Bengals are going to be good. Whoever wins the AFC South, and then it's the Chiefs and the Chargers. So you got 5 or 6 spots already locked up. And so, Lamar Jackson better bring it, because the defense won't be as good as it's been in the past with some of those losses in the back end, and there's a lot of people out there standing in the way.
Yeah, Eric, what do you think of where the Ravens sit right now?
Yeah, they didn't have a lot of draft picks. They did some stuff there, but offensive line, Linderbaum from last year, should be better. Stanley hopefully should be healthy, but there's a lot of ifs now on that team, and Lamar obviously being the biggest one, them getting him Zay Flowers. I like Zay Flowers a lot. I wish he would have fell to Kansas City. But now they have him, Bateman, Odell, Andrews, Likely, Dobbins, Edward. Like they have some weapons for him finally now. And Monken coming in and being the OC, I think should really help. So I'm optimistic, but it's a lot on Lamar's shoulders. And that when you give him 52 million APY, that's what's implied. And I know that he has his doubters. And I think his doubters have realistic reasons to doubt him.
Yeah. Throwing that Lamar that contract and their numbers is really pricey, and they're going a total different direction from how they've done things. And it was when they paid Joe Flacco that they crashed and burned. So now I think Lamar Jackson's better than Joe Flacco, but he's going to need to be a lot better than Joe Flacco to make it happen. Jets get Aaron Rodgers finally, Jeff. Is he, plus what they got done in the draft, enough? You mentioned the thick AFC. Where does this put them in the mix now that you see what they've drafted and now that they finally have the deal done for Aaron Rodgers?
Well, it depends on if they can keep him healthy, right? I mean, if their tackle situation, they signed it. I forget the guy's name. They just signed him a couple days ago. If they're able to get some quality play out of that guy or Mekhi Becton, Max Miller, Dwayne Brown, whatever combination they throw out there, they should be. To me, Buffalo is still the best team in the AFC East. And I know it's kind of become very trendy to pick the Jets as being the best team. They're going to have a transition period there as Rodgers gets settled in, they get used to him. But they're definitely going to be a wild card team. And the Buccaneers won their championship as a wild card team. It's easy to forget now that they were 7-4 after 11 games, and people were wondering if they were going to make the playoffs in Tom Brady's first year there. So I believe that they've got the kind of potential in New York, the same kind of potential with Aaron Rodgers playing quarterback. He's doing all the right things. He's there for the OTAs. He's obviously dialed in and wants to show what he can do. Aaron Rodgers, when he's got a chip on his shoulders, is always going to be tough to beat. But again, it comes back to, can they get that offensive line right? Because you saw how important that pick was at 13 that they wanted to keep. And when they had to trade it away and go to 15, what it meant. It meant they weren't going to get a top flight offensive tackle in this draft, and they wound up taking a pass rusher. So yeah, they better be able to protect him.
Eric, what do you think? Where do the Jets sit in the mix now?
I think just right. I think the expectation is probably a wild card. The Bills, I know people in the chat will say, what have the Bills accomplished? But the Bills are a pretty good team. The Jets, their coach hasn't coached a playoff game yet. Their GM hasn't GM'd a playoff team yet. Aaron Rodgers didn't quarterback a playoff team last year. So there's a lot to prove. I do see the parallels between Tampa Bay and 2020 because the Saints were in a very similar position where they were kind of the best team that didn't win a Super Bowl for a number of years in a row. And, then they had to take on, the Jets. Nick Lammers makes a really good point in the chat, though. Like the difference between this AFC East and that NFC South is that there's another team in the mix here, right? That's actually going to be competitive, and that's the Miami Dolphins, a team that went out and got Jalen Ramsey, that went out and got, some players this offseason, not a ton of draft picks, but, Tua hopefully healthy. Like that's going to be a 3-team race, and you could see a situation where you think about who are the wild cards in the AFC: the Chargers, maybe the Broncos, the Jets, the Dolphins, no one from the South probably. And then, Cincinnati or Baltimore, whoever doesn't win that division, maybe Cleveland too with Deshaun. I mean, this thing's loaded in the AFC. So it's like, I wouldn't be surprised if you don't see the Jets come January, and that's tough.
Yeah, I'm not enamored with the draft. I'm not enamored with what they've added this year. I mean, they're putting a lot on Aaron Rodgers. Tommy mentioned it was 7-5. He said, Jeff, to your point, they were even 7-5. They lost to the Chiefs. Didn't lose again, which that year was just 4 more games. 4.
Yeah, they had a late bye.
And got it going. But Aaron Rodgers got to be top shelf. Mekhi Becton, they don't even like. They didn't offer him the 5th-year option. So I think it'll be interesting to see. And what happens to Aaron Rodgers if it doesn't go well? Like at 7-5, Tom Brady sits tall in the saddle. What does Aaron Rodgers do? Right? Like
New York City.
In New York City. Yeah. Like after having, Jeff, you've covered the Packers. Like the media there is more like, college fanboy sites than it is like real, New York, like they're out of line with some of the questions they ask. Like they're looking to start crap when they go there. Like, how is he going to handle that?
Yeah, no, it's going to be rough. It's not going to be relax, RELAX, when they're struggling. Like, he's going to be on the front of court, on the front of tabloids. His personal life is going to be discussed a lot more. That was never a subject that was really broached in Green Bay. There's going to be different dynamics going on. So they've got a great team. They've got a great roster. He's going to have a ton of weapons. If they are able to trot out, if Breece Hall comes back healthy, if Elijah Veritaka is healthy, if Garrett Wilson is anything close to what he was last year, which he should be, they should be dynamic. But I always try to guard against this feeling of, oh, it's going to be amazing because, one, the competition is stronger. And two, I don't really – any team that hires Nathaniel Hackett a year after what went down in Denver, that to me is like one of the most underrated parts of what's going to happen here. Either he's a real coach or he's not, and we're going to find out real fast. I think he's not a real coach.
Yeah, Matt LaFleur was clearly the juice with the Green Bay Packers there, and not Nathaniel Hackett. And I agree. Like, do you have a bad seed that's got a bunch of yes men around him?
Yep.
Right? Like, that's not a good spot to be in. So, I think it'll be difficult. All right, that's going to do it for us here on the 2D podcast. Remember, we're brought to you by our friends at Gann Asphalt and Concrete. No commissions, in-house crews, free consultations. Every project comes with a written warranty. If you've got problems at your business with the parking lot, no, you don't. Anything and everything that needs to be done can be done by one company, Gann Asphalt and Concrete. GannAsphalt.com to find them online. One contractor, all things parking lots. For Jeff Chadiha from the NFL Network, Eric Eager from Super Sports, my name is Soren Petro saying thank you very much for joining us here on the 2D podcast.